distinct privileges. Great. Okay, so Merakodotas Jane Gavin.
So I should also click continue?
Schönen Dank für dieses Programm.
No, Sunzer Fargenigen, Emeser Fargenigen. So we'll start to 103.
Oh, Heather. Wow, Heather's here. Okay, let's see. Side by side, let's see. So how do I call you? Wie soll ich Zen Dimension? Oh, gallery.
Well, das ist Boris, du darfst die Gallery.
Oh, yeah. Okay, ich mach das kleiner. No problem. Okay, Versuch, darf ich das. Wow. Amazing.
Ja, schönen Dank als. Schönen Dank.
Dank allemaal.
Hi. Okay. So Ruth, meet Eric Byron, who you've worked with at the Ellis Island project.
Oh my gosh.
So a very good.
Yeah,
zum ersten Mal. You'll probably meet lots of people.
Sheva, there is echo. Maybe it goes for you.
An echo. So
kannst du hören?
My headset.
No, you just need to make sure that in your audio setting, you're talking through the computer.
Sie können sein, es gewesen wegen anders. Ich will verstummen, allem, aber lass mich wissen, ob ich soll lassen.
Ich meine, es ist besser zu verstummen allem, wenn Sheva und Ruth tun eine Präsentation und nachdem, ob die Menschen wollen, haben Fragen, wirst du können sie anstimmen, ja? Borach?
Sie wollen sich allein davon anstimmen, aber ich kann verstummen.
Derweil verstummen alle.
Okay. Dürfen wir haben Privilegien oder gar nicht? Du kannst uns anstimmen und okay, es lassen wir anheben. Menschen sind gekommen, zu was wir warten.
So, ich will dich vorstellen, Sheva, und nachdem du. Gut?
Ja, und nachdem, yes.
Okay. Deine Freund, deine Gast, Joshua Versammelte, thank you so much for joining us at this rare event sponsored by the Workers' Circle and the Boston Workers' Circle. It is my Emeser Fargenigen, a real pleasure to introduce to you a renowned Yiddish language and culture scholar and one of my first Yiddish teachers, Sheva Zucker. Sheva is the author of the textbooks Yiddish, An Introduction to Language, Literature and Culture, Volume 1 and 2, and the editor and producer of CD, The Golden Peacock, Voice of the Yiddish Writer. She has taught and lectured on Yiddish language, literature, and culture on 5 continents, and has taught Yiddish for more than 2 decades in the Uriel Weinreich summer program in Yiddish language to literally thousands of people. She was for many years the director of League for Yiddish and the editor of its Yiddish magazine Auf and Schwer. We are proud that Sheva is teaching at Arbeiter Yiddish program and was among the first online Yiddish language instructors since 2015. She was teaching Yiddish past spring semester to over 60 students of our Workers' Circle Yiddish program. Sheva Zucker.
Okay, thank you, Kolya. It's a pleasure to see all you people. I wish I'm not going to start saying who it's a special pleasure to see, but you know who you are. And it's quite amazing the response that this program has gotten. I'm assuming that means that we've read all the formerly discovered Yiddish writers and now we just need to find some new ones. Who knows? It's kind of amazing that so many people are interested, so it's wonderful. So let me introduce Ruth, who is the translator and the explorer and discoverer. Ruth Murphy is a translator specializing in the research and translation of Yiddish literature, historical documents, and Yizkor memorial books. Her translations have been featured in the Pakenträger and in Metamorphosis. She's also served as a translator for the Ellis Island Discography Project, where she transcribed and translated multiple early 20th century Yiddish songs relating to the Yiddish speaking immigrant experience. She also translated the J. Abrams book, The Life and Work of an Exceptional Personality, which got a review in the Jewish Review of Books, which is no small thing. So yes, so that is Ruth, and we're going to begin now. I think, Ruth, we should tell people, you should tell people a little bit about the biography of Salomea Perl. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sheva, for that introduction. And I want to tell everyone what an honor it's been to work with Sheva Zucker, who's one of the most best-known pedagogists with Yiddish. And she's not only super knowledgeable, but she's super nice and a whole lot of fun to work with. I've really enjoyed working with her. So about Salomea Perl, we don't know much. There's for original Yiddish sources, there's only two. There's an entry in Salman Reisen's lexicon von die Jiddische Literatur, and then there's one line in Yankiv Shatsky's Geschichte von Jiden Varsha. And we know that she was born in the town of, I'm going to say this wrong, Lomshe?
You said it right.
Lomshe. My Polish is, oh my gosh. Perl was born in the town of Losha, and she was raised in the larger city of Lublin. Her father was Kalman Avigdor Forla, and this is coming straight out of Raisin. Her father was Kalman Avigdor Perla, and he was a Hebreus and a Maskil, and he was best known for his book, Oitzer Loshen Chachomim, which was Treasury of Rabbinic Saints, which was published in 1900. We don't know very much at all about her mother. We know nothing about her mother, basically. She attended a privately run Maskilic school, possibly her father's school, that was in Lublin. And then she studied in Paris, London, and she finished out her studies at the University of Geneva. She settled in Warsaw, and she opened up a translation bureau, which she kept for many years. And she debuted as a writer, not in Yiddish, but in Polish. So she wrote for the Polish, Jewish, Polish-speaking newspaper, I guess magazine, Israelita. She also had a book published, which in English, I believe it's called Diary of a Jewish Maiden, like that. And she also had a story in Pieter Chmielowski's journal, Atena. And this was in the 1890s, and she caught the attention of the literary circles there, especially that of Yud Lamet Peretz. And he encouraged her to write in Yiddish, which she did. And he, between 1895 and 1896, he published 3 of her stories. And then he just tells us that, he says, because of conflict with Peretz and because of sad personal circumstances, she was separated from literary activity. And at that point, she only published 4 more stories, 1901, 2 in 1903, and the last one in 1910. This is in Yiddish stories, all short stories, and that's it. And the line in Shasky says that she was a capable storyteller and that she died in 1916. And I'll let Sheva talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so that is all we knew. And when I read her brief bio, which is pretty much the same in the later modern Yiddish lexicon, except it gives the death date of 1916, I just had so many questions. One of them is, did she marry? Did she have children? Although my daughters would say, you wouldn't ask that about a man. And maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, but it's an interesting question given the time. I also wondered a lot about her name, Salomea. It's not a Yiddish name. And I'm thinking that maybe, I'm sure she somewhere has a Yiddish name, but possibly because she began publishing in Polish, she used her more Polish name. Now, thanks to when we sent out this invitation, I'm not sure if Piotr is here yet, but Piotr Nazaruk from Lublin, who's part of the Brahma-Grodzka group that tries to preserve the Jewish history of Lublin, Piotr, whom I know from the Yiddish summer program at YIVO, wrote right away and said, oh my God, she's a Lublin writer. Let me see what I can find out about her. So Piotr has been amazingly helpful. He found a marriage record for somebody called Salomea Perl, daughter of the same parents as Salomea, who married Shmuel Yankel Gelfand in Lublin in 1889. So Piotr said, could it be a sister? I say it could be her. She could well have been Sarah, but I probably will never know. But that would put her at having married at age 20, but we don't know. The other thing that I thought that I wondered, was she at all political? So many people in those days became aligned with some political group. Again, we don't know it, and it's certainly not reflected in her Yiddish writings. Her father, as Ruth has mentioned, had a private school in Lublin located on 11 Grodzka Street, and where they taught calligraphy. I'm not sure if that actually means just nice handwriting or calligraphy. Russian, Polish, German, French, French, arithmetic, and needlework. So it's very likely that she studied at this kind of very aufgeklärt, sort of enlightened school. And more mysterious is the date of her death. Thank you, David. Yes, I said that. Probably just means handwriting. Okay. More mysterious is the date of her death. As Ruth mentioned, Yiddish sources listed as 1916. However, there is a notice that Piotr has found for us in the newspaper Nasz Przegląd, our overview from 1927. And it reads that Salomea Perl has returned and is providing translation and correspondence in foreign language services on 31 Królewska Street in Warsaw. So clearly she was still alive in 1927. And then in 1928, and this one is more interesting and a little bit more kind of comical. It reminds me of the famous thing that Mark Twain once said, the news of my death is highly exaggerated. In this clipping to the same newspaper, she writes, so this is the 25th anniversary of the Yiddish newspaper Freund, Der Freund, to which she contributed in its first edition, she contributed this story, Zipka, and there was a jubilee, there was an anniversary celebration, and this is what she writes. Dear Mr. Editor, during the 25th anniversary of Der Freund, the first Jewish newspaper, Mr. Freund gave a speech in which he listed the co-workers of that newspaper, all deceased but Sholem Ash. For the sake of accuracy, exactness, and my own interest as an author, I allow myself to point out that I was also a co-worker of that St. Petersburg newspaper, which published my original work, Zipka, in 1903, in 2 large pieces, Salomea Perl. So the question is, and I don't really mean to suggest anything nefarious like they killed her off in the Yiddish lexicon, but what happened that she so got out of the spotlight in Yiddish that people actually thought that she was dead? I mean, this is a great mystery. I maybe someday we'll know the answer. So it's rather intriguing, but the thing that interests me the most, and we'll get to this later, is that that, as I suspected, the sorts of things she writes about in Yiddish are very different from the sort of thing that she writes about in Polish. But let's go back to Ruth and the amazing thing that she has done. First of all, by finding these stories, and then, of course, by making them available. So I think, Ruth, that it's safe to say that Salomea Perl was virtually unknown until your translation. How did you stumble upon her, and what made you want to pursue this project? How did you find the materials? That can't have been easy. And what were the obstacles that you came across?
I found her pretty much purely by luck and Google. I have, Yiddish for me has always been about the stories. That's my interest in it. I love the stories. I love Yiddish literature. I have always. That's been my connection to it, to my grandparents who gave me the Sheva singer stories when I was little. So I've always loved the stories in Yiddish. And the Pocket Tracker had put out 2016, 2017. Pocket Tracker had put out a call for translation, and they wanted a woman writer, Yiddish woman writer. So I was looking for somebody who had not been translated. And I did a search on the internet, you know, Yiddish woman writer, newspaper, like that. And I came across Marie Orhan's article, which is women's participation in Eastern European Yiddish press. And that's where I found Perl's name, along with a few others. And I was able to go to the Yiddish historical press that's online and find one of her stories, which was Tipke, and read it. And that was it. It was, what a story. And then I found Putki mit Bremen. And after that, you know, I was just sick. I had to read the rest of her stories. And that was about a 2 to 3 year process trying to find because I lived in Killeen, Texas, which doesn't have much in the way of Yiddish stuff. So I was able to find 3 online, and then I hired somebody through Yivo to do some research for me, and he found 2 of the stories, and then the last 2 stories, Breut Suchendik and On Kinder, I just simply could not find. We knew it was in Peretz's, the Yonte Blättlich somewhere, but I don't understand how this book was published, or this journal, but it was in some version of it, and we never seemed to hit the right one. My daughter-in-law tried to help me find it, and finally I called Dr. Ludmila Sholokhova, who is the director of archives at Yivo, and I just thought, I am desperate. I've been looking for these stories for 2 years. I cannot find them anywhere. And I think she put me on hold for about 3 or 4 minutes, you know, did her, and came back on, and yes, I have found your stories for you. And I was like, you're kidding. But she found them in probably under 4 minutes, and I had my last 2 stories, and the rest is history. So, and wow. Some of my obstacles were mainly, one, that my Yiddish was probably at an intermediate level at best, and then just lack, you know, I'm self-taught, Yiddish not that great, and then 2 was being so isolated. So I had a lot of help. And the 5 things that were paramount for my success, and I'll just list them really quick. Number 1 was my teacher, Norman Buder, who spent 2 hours a week with me on the phone for probably 3 years. And then second was the publication of the Beinfeld-Bachner dictionary, which for me, with such a limited vocabulary and knowledge, my parents didn't speak Yiddish, I didn't know the language very well, was a game changer. The online Yiddish historical press was huge, Dr. Sholokhova, and then my colleague and girlfriend, my friend, Elena Maximova, who was able to help me with some of the real obscure kind of Slavic words. So I just wanted to say thank you to them. So okay. Time, money, lack of the usual.
Good. So I don't know if you can see him, Ruth, but Sholem Bainfeld,
I saw him.
Dictionary fame is here. So
I can't tell you what a difference that dictionary has made to this translator and probably many, many others. So
for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Buckner too, right. And the whole team.
Yes. So why do you think she was completely forgotten? And do you have, do you feel that she that she writes from a particularly feminine, female perspective?
I don't know why she was forgotten, other than that was the nature of the game with the Yiddish newspapers. I mean, they were already in decline, and I mean, she published so little. I don't know. And my teacher asked me whether a man could have written these stories, and I gave it a lot of thought. And again, it's like, I mean, a man could, but I don't know if he could quite nail it the way she did. And I don't think she wrote from a feminist perspective. This is just my opinion. I think she wrote from like a social critique, a critique of society, because in the stories, particularly with Plotki and also with Keiko, and a little bit with Dostoevsky, it's the men who are trapped too, not just the women. So I feel like it was a critique of the kind of the hypocrisy of maybe the Jewish society at that time, is my thought.
Yeah, it's hard to say because she certainly depicts the plight of women in a way that feels so personal, so immediate. But then, as you say, it's not as if she can't depict a male character. I mean, it seems that most of her characters are constricted, and that seems to be her main theme. So let's get to one of the stories. We're going to read the Kanve completely, the canvas, and then excerpts of two other stories. So let's start with the Kanve, okay, which you can follow along on the screen as you see it. Or you can just look at our faces, whichever. I think you'll see that I put a little mark where the parts switch, where it goes from Ruth to me and so forth. But you should be able to keep up even without that. Okay, so this is actually the last story that she published in Yiddish in, was it 1910? In Sheva. Okay, Ruth?
Don't think that I've always been a merchant woman. My husband, may he live and be well, was once well off, a wealthy man. Labels sender cuts. He had the look of a count, a king. He is handsome even now, a striking man. These days he lies in bed, poor creature, paralyzed. He's lost the use of his arms and legs. 11 years already he's lain this way. It's cost me a fortune. Wherever there was a doctor, a healer, a rabbi who worked miracles. 3 times I've sent him to Bus to visit the graves of the miracle workers. It has been ordained an affair of God. One is not permitted to argue with God. Praise be the eternal one. He and I, poor things, never had any children. As for feeding him, he does eat. Surprisingly, he has an appetite. I buy him this and that, a little wine, milk, an orange. The neighbor woman gives it to him a little bit at a time. However, he would rather it was I who served him his food. He loves me like life itself. He misses me so every day, as if we had just gotten married. Golda, is that you? My darling, my precious one. And he hugs and kisses me like long ago.
Okay, so before I begin the Yiddish, I just want to draw your attention to the first line, which is Deutschmerisch, kind of. It's she's addressing somebody in a Germanic fashion, and the rest of the piece is not like that at all. But this leads me to believe that she wants to somehow impress this person and to tell them, him, her, that what you see is not really who she is, that she has another self, another life that maybe she never got to live. And I think that's really important. And it's also important that this word that is so impossible to translate, Händlerin, which I wouldn't have done any different than Ruth, merchant woman, but you might get the impression that she has a store. I suspect she's on the street selling something, and we never learn what it is that she's selling, because really that's not important to who she really believes herself to be. Okay, die Kanve. Meinen Sie nicht, ich bin ewig gewesen a Händlerin. Mein Mann, soll mir leben und gesund sein, ist einmal gewesen a Gewirr, ein Euscher, Label, Sender, Katz, ein Äußern von a Graf, von a Kaiser, schön ist noch itzt, wie Gold. Heint liegt nebach gelähmt, abgenommen ihm geworden Hand und Fies. 11 Jahr liegt schon, abgekost hat es mich a Vermögen. Wunder a Doktor, a Räufe, a guter Jid, 3-mal hab ich ihm kein Bus geschickt, zu gute Jiden, auf Keveroves gefahren. Es ist aber schert, a Gottsach, mit Gott tormen sich nicht sparen, geläubt ist der Eberster, Essen ist der ja, Appetit hat dafke. Ich kauf ihm etwas Wein, Milch, a Pomeranz, die Schochente geht es ihm bislach weiß, Kinderlach haben wir einfach nicht. Wollte besser gewollt, ich soll es ihm allein erlangen. Hat mich lieb das Leben. Bänkt noch mir so, wie es wollt gewesen, erst nach der Chassene. Goldele, bist schon gekommen, mein Leben, mein Kreun, und halst und kuscht mich wie einmal.
I didn't want him. I wept. What a foolish child I was. He was a widower, a rich man. I was already more than old enough to be married, 18, almost 19, without fortune and without dowry. Beautiful I was, yes, eyes black as coal and a splendid part in my hair. Very beautiful. My mother worried about me entire nights. She would be able to sleep, fretting, what will become of her? What will be her life? I was a silent one, a little bit odd, as if I were a stranger in the house. For days on end, I sat by the window and embroidered. And as an embroiderer, I had a rare talent. I embroidered wings along with trees, also flowers. It was magnificent to behold. I'd never been taught, but I had a gifted mind, and what the eye saw, the hand soon reproduced. When I was still a child, a girl of not quite 10, I embroidered a curtain for the Holy Ark, and it lit up the whole synagogue. It was embroidered with gold and silk, except for the Star of David, which was done in pearls, sewn with the tiniest of pearls.
Ich hab ihm nicht gewollt. Gewähnt hab ich, ein narrisch Kind bin ich gewähnt. Ist gewähnt ein Almen, ein Euscher. Ein Mädel schon in die Jahren 18, knapp 19, unvermögen, unnaden. Schön bin ich ja gewähnt, Augen schwarz wie Keul und ein Schrund rein wie Gold. Die Mama meine hat sich gesorgt und ganze Nacht nicht gekonnt schlafen. Was wird sein der Tachlis? Der Tachlis. Ich bin gewesen ein Schweigefdicke, etwas am Modne, also wie ein Fremde in Stub. Ganze Tag bin ich gesessen beim Fenster und gehofften. A Hefterin bin ich gewesen a seltene, Fliegel mit Bämer, mit Blumen. Es ist gewesen a Pracht anzugucken. Gelernt hat mich keiner nicht. Nur ein Kopf hab ich gehabt, a Feierdicken. Und was das Zeug hat der Sinn, hat die Hand bald nachgemacht. Noch als Kind, ein Mädel gemacht von 10 Jahren, hab ich gehabt ausgehofften a Paräuches. Ist die Schule gar verscheint geworden. Es sie gewesen gehofften mit Gold und mit Seid. Der Morgen David aber mit Perl, mit gar kleinschige Perl ausgenäht.
I understood how to select colors as does a painter. Under my hands, the canvas became alive, and the trees grew and grew as if they were in a great green field. I sat for entire days engrossed in my work, not speaking a single sound. Even if a fire had broken out, I still would not have uttered a sound. I beg of you, my darling, may you be well. What kind of demon is tormenting you? My mother would many times burst out in anger, but would afterwards bite her tongue. She did not want to swear at her child. She trembled before curses as if they were fire. All her rage, however, all the bitterness in her heart, she would unleash on her husband, alas, on my handsome father. Why don't you concern yourself about this? How will things turn out for her? It's proper to you then that she sits here until she is an old maid, she raged at him. Why aren't you seeing to it that a match is made? Too few wealthy men in town, Go to all your householders, yell, exclaim to them, Jews, in the streets like merit, lies merit for the world to come, a Jewish maiden, 19 years old.
Farben zukleiben habe ich verstanden wie ein Moller. Die Kanve hat unter meine Hand gelebt und die Bäume haben gewachsen und gewachsen wie auf einem großen grünen Feld. Und gesessen bin ich ganze Tag vertieft in meine Arbeit und habe nicht geredet kein Wort. Es wollte gekonnt brennen, wollte ich mich euch nicht gewesen angerufen. Ich bete dich, mein Freund, sollst mir so gesund sein. Was für ein schwarzes Jahr ist dir? Hat die Mama sich wie viel Mal voneinander gebesert, nur bald wieder verbissen die Lippen. Schalten hat sie ihr Kind nicht gewollt. Vor Klolles hat sie gezittert wie vor Feier. Dem ganzen Kass aber, das ganze verbittert Herz, pflegt sie auslassen zum Mann, zum schönen Taten, im Stehens gesagt. Für was klärst du nicht? Was wird sein der Tachles? Bei dir wollt gewinn recht, sie soll sitzen bis in Gräuen Zopf, hat sie sich gebesert. Für was säst du nicht das Schirrchton? Winzig Gewirrim in Städtel. Geh zu deiner Balabatim, schrei, ruf, jeden, eurem Habe liegt in die Gassen, a Yiddish Mädel für 19 Jahre.
Up in the garret of my girlfriend's mother, there lived a young student with big, huge dark eyes. He was sick and consumptive, yet such a gaze he had, so deep, so passionate. At night, when everyone else was asleep, he would play his fiddle. There he would play, sitting in the window under the open sky, above him the stars. I wouldn't sleep. For hours and hours I listened and I trembled. The fiddle spoke words, sweet and sad. It wailed and pleaded, it called.
Oben in Dachstiebel bei mein Chavertorens Mame hat gewohnt ein junger Student mit große schwarze Augen. A kranker ist gewesen, a schwindsüchtiger, nur a Blick hat gehabt, a tiefen, a feierdicken. Bei Nacht, wenn alle Flecken schon schlafen, fleckt spielen auf der Fiedel. Spielen fleckt sitzendig auf dem Fenster unter dem offenen Himmel, über ihm die Sterne. Ich flieg nicht schlafen, schon lang bin ich gesessen und gehorcht und gezittert. Die Fiedel hat gerät Wörter, süß und treurig. Sie hat geklockt und gebeten, sie hat gerufen.
One time, my mother had gotten out of bed and dragged me down from the window by my hair. And truly in my house, I felt like a stranger, like a prisoner, like someone bought and sold. I was drawn to somewhere far away, far to where I myself didn't know. It seemed to me that I had been born in another land, among other people, in a different society. I dreamed of other worlds, these beautiful worlds with crystal palaces, with enchanted emperors and empresses. And my thoughts were being woven and embroidered images even more beautiful than the flowers and trees on my canvas. Images painted with colors brighter and more vivid than those of the greatest artists. And it intoxicated me, elated me, inspired me. Hours long I stared, engrossed in those pictures, in my own thoughts. I saw myself free and proud in those crystal palaces with those enchanted kings, near me a prince, an enchanted prince.
Die Mama meine ist einmal aufgestanden von dem Bett und mich bei die Haar herabgezogen vom Fenster. Und ich habe mich in Stub gefühlt, Tage wie eine Fremde, wie eine Gefangene, wie eine Verkäufte. Es hat mich gezogen, geht's weit, weit. Ich habe allein nicht gewusst, wohin. Es hat sich mir gedacht, dass ich bin geboren in ein anderes Land, zwischen anderen Menschen, in einer anderen Umgebung. Es hat sich mir geholmt von anderen schönen Welten, kristallene Palazen, von verkischeften Kaisers und Kaiserinnen und Kaiserinnen. In meine Gedanken haben sich mir etwas gewebt und gestickt Bilder, schöner noch wie die Blumen und Bäume auf mein Canvas. Es haben sich gemahlen Farben, heller und lebendiger wie die Farben von die größten Malers. Und beräuscht hat es mich, belebt, begeistert. Stundenlang habe ich geblickt, versunken mich in jene Bilder, in mir selbst. Ich habe mich gesehen frei, stolz in jene kristallene Palazen mit jene verkischefte Kaisers. Neben mir ein Prinz, ein verkischefter Prinz.
I loved, so terribly loved, this bridegroom, this unknown one who lived deep in my heart, quietly, so very quietly, such an intimate quiet. Many were the times with a rush and intense feeling, I pressed my hands to my heart and called out into the air, "Come already, come." My father, when my mother was not at home, he feared her as he did fire, would quietly come up to me, take me by the hand, and stroke the part of my hair softly. With such a loving softness. "Don't worry, child," he consoled me. "Your intended, God willing, will come." And I would look at my father and smile.
Geliebt habe ich, schrecklich geliebt dem Chossen, dem Unbekannten, was hat gewohnt tief in mein Herz, still, gar still, herzig still. Mit einem heißen Gefühl habe ich wieviel Mal zugedrückt die Hände zum Herzen und gerufen in der Luft rein, komm schon, komm. Der Tate meiner, wenn die Mama ist nicht gewesen in Stub, vor ihr hat gezittert wie vor Feier, vielleicht Stillerheit zugehen zu mir, annehmen mich bei der Hand und glätten mir dem Schrund. Weich, herzig, weich. Sorg nicht, Kind, hat mich getröst, dein Sivig wird im Jötzeshem kommen. Und ich pfleg gucken dem Taten und schmeicheln.
I sat with my girlfriend in front of our house on the lovely green grass, embroidering a watch pouch for her as a Purim gift for her groom. It was a warm spring day, and the little birds in the breezes danced and sang. It was a song filled with joy and delight, a wedding song, and the birds danced their wedding dance. "Mazel tov, little birds," my girlfriend laughed and clapped her hands. "Mazel tov to you. May you celebrate a bris next year." I did not laugh. I sat preoccupied, gloomy. A feeling of anxiousness constricted my breath. Long did I spend picking out colors. From each color came forth to me a dozen others, very, very dark and very, very bright. "Mindala, why hasn't he played for the last 2 nights?" I asked quietly, also quietly, holding my breath. My lips trembled. "He is ill, Golda, mortally ill. He can play no more." My heart thudded like a hammer. I didn't speak, didn't reply. The canvas fell out of my hands. My eyes soared far, far away.
Gesessen bin ich mit mein Chaverte vor dem Stub auf dem schönen grünen Gras und hab gehofft für ihr a Segertasch zu a Schalachmones für ihr Chossen. Es ist gewesen a warmer Frühlingstag und die Vögelach in der Luft haben getanzt und gesungen. A Gesang ist es gewesen voll Fried und Naches, a chassene Gesang. Die Vögelach haben getanzt, sehr chassene Tanz. "Mazel tov, Vögelach", hat gelacht mein Chaverte und gepatscht in die Hände. "Mazel tov euch, über ein Jahr a Bris." Ich hab nicht gelacht. Ich bin gesessen, vertracht, verklemmt. A Banggefühl hat mich zugeschnurrt die Brust. Langsam habe ich zugeklebt Farben. Jede Farbe hat gehabt zehnerlei andere Farben, ganz, ganz dunkel und ganz, ganz hell. "Mindele, für was hat schon 2 Nächte nicht gespielt?" habe ich sie gefragt, still, gar still, mit einem verchappten Atem. Die Lippen meine haben gezittert. "Er ist krank, Goldele, sterblich krank. Er kann nicht mehr spielen." Das Herz hat in mir geklappt wie mit einem Hammer. Ich habe nicht geredet, nicht geämpft. Die Kamwe ist mir herausgefallen von die Händen. Meine Augen sind geflogen, weit, weit geflogen.
"My child," my mother came up to me, "put aside your work, enough taking care of other brides and making gifts for other grooms. Tomorrow, God willing, it's for your own betrothed that you'll be embroidering trees, birds, and flowers." Your engagement contract is being written. Child, get up. I remained seated, my head hanging low, silent, pensive, my mind far away. The little birds in the air above us danced and sang. Before my eyes swam the flowers and trees that I had sewn onto my canvas. Inside me, my heart wailed and shrieked. With love and longing, I pressed my face to the bright colors. Label sender Katz, a wealthy bridegroom. Get up, child, come.
Kind meins, ist zugegangen die Mame. Lega weg die Arbeit, genug scheint fremde Kalles versorgt und fremde Chesanim beschenkt. Morgen, mir Hashem, wirst du schon vor dein eigenem Chossen heften Bämer mit Vögel, mit Blumen. Du schreibst Schneuem, Kind, steh auf. Ich bin geblieben sitzen mit einem herabgelassenem Kopf, still, vertracht, vercholmt. Die Vögelach über uns in der Luft haben getanzt und gesungen. Vor meine Augen haben geschwommen Blumen und Bäume, was ich hab sie genäht auf der Kanve. Das Herz hat in mir geweint und geschrien. Mit Liebe und Bänkschaft hab ich zugedrückt mein Ponym zu die helle Farben. Label Sender Katz, a gwirischer Chossen. Steh auf, Kind, komm. Okay, so that was Die Kanve. I hope you liked it. Ruth has told me that this is her favorite of the stories, and I think I might be in agreement with you. So tell us what it is about this story that so moves you. And yeah.
Oh my God, even just reading it is like, but I mean, I love that story because of the protagonist, Golda. She's so trapped. And she is this immensely talented artist, yet with absolutely nowhere to go with her creativity and drive. There's no outlet for her at all, aside from something for the show, an accepted woman's thing. So she retreats into her own mind, and she's creating this entire fantasy world that she expresses through her canvases. And when reality eventually intrudes, as reality does, we can just, at that moment, you can hear the walls just come crashing down and her mind is shrieking. No, but what can she do? And Pearl never explicitly states it, but we get the feeling, I get the feeling anyways, that at that moment, when the canvas fell out of her hands, was the last time she ever picked up an embroidered canvas. And it's interesting, one thing, Sheva, we've talked about the Sheva, that the canvas was the last story that Pearl wrote. She wrote it in 1910, which was 7 years after her previous story. And it's the only one that's in first person. So you wonder, is this, are we meeting face to face with Salomea Perl? Is this Salomea Perl? So
maybe who somehow feels that her literary career is at an end. I never saw that, but when you say it, yeah, it could be. We don't know. But yeah, what I love about it is the way she kind of starts at the end and then goes back, and it kind of unravels, and you have to pay close attention to figure out what's happening here. So what really fascinates me about Salomea Perl is that here was a woman clearly very, very educated. She went to school in Switzerland, in Paris, in London. She must have known 5 or 6 languages. She became a translator. And yet there is no hint of this life that she lived in any of these stories. She writes about women who are clearly very traditional, whose mothers think that by saying a curse, they'll actually curse them, who go to healers and Hasidic rebbes. And this clearly was not the life that she had. So I'm fascinated by why we get no stories about the young women going off on the continent, going to school, having other kinds of experiences. But the fact is, and thanks to Piot, she did write about those kind of people, but in Polish, it seems. So the book, as soon as I heard the title, From a Diary of a Young Jewish Woman, I suspected that this was going to be a different kind of a girl. This was not going to be the kind of girl who gets herself stuck in a shidduch, like our Golda, or if she does, it's going to at least be with some kind of a fight. So Piotr was kind enough to précis the first chapter for us, but it's enough to know. And this is what happens in the Polish Diary of a Young Woman, which is 1895, which is written before she enters Yiddish literature. Rachela is the daughter of Hasidic parents, less strict than most Hasidim in their town. One day, a Jewish family of Germans, and when they say in Yiddish Deutschen, it doesn't necessarily mean they're German. It means they are more assimilated, because these people are clearly Polish-speaking Jews. Of Germans, very assimilated and well-educated, moved into their building, and our young Rachela befriends their daughter Anzia. And soon Rachela learns that even though she thought she was very smart and educated, she really knows nothing about the world, and she lives in darkness and ignorance. And slowly she learns how to read and to speak Polish from Anja's books, and she's eager to learn more. And as luck would have it, Anja has a brother, Gustav, who is a medical student and of course extremely handsome. And the trio decides that he will teach Rachela, and he promises her true enlightenment, and she eagerly learns under his guidance. And at the same time, she starts to feel alien among her old Hasidic friends and family. So that's chapter 1. What more can happen? I don't know, but stay tuned. But it's a completely different It's about a completely different kind of woman and a completely different milieu. So she was writing maybe more about her life, but not in Yiddish. So I think that for whoever writes the definitive study or the first study of Salomea Perl, and I'm giving you a dissertation topic here, you have to know Polish, it seems to me. And I think she would be a fascinating study in a bilingual woman, a woman that lived really in two worlds, and what she wrote in each language and what that signified.
Apparently, she thought her Yiddish reading audience would be very different.
Apparently, although the Yiddish reading audience was starting to read stuff about, a little later from women, but even so, it's definitely coming in. So yeah, to me, it's a question. And later when we have the Q&A, if people have any ideas, would love to hear them. Also, she mentions the Schund, the part, a lot. And again, later, if anybody, it seems like an odd thing to mention how beautiful her part was. Although maybe she mentions it because she knows later she'll be putting on a wig and you won't see that. I don't know, perhaps that's why. I'm not really sure. But anyway, the stories are, some of them, I think, so stark and so strange. And they feel, at least to me, that they're from a world that is very distant and very, very primitive. Jewish life for both men and women in her stories seems so bleak. And I can't really think of any Yiddish writer who, to me, feels this way, although she does. There's one story by Peretz called a Verstärkter Shabbos, a ruined Shabbos, which has to do about sexual relations between a young couple and the mother-in-law getting in the way because she's worried that maybe the daughter is, having her period, whatever. That, as we read the next story, you might see why it reminds me of that a little bit. So let's look at the story On Kinder, with, what is it called in English? Without Children. And let me just, because we're only reading a part, let me just kind of fill you in up to that point. It's Friday afternoon, 5 hours before Shabbos, and Rivka, a young woman, a young wife.
Oh, it's called Childless.
Childless, okay, is preparing for Shabbos. Actually, it's Shabbos Nachemu, before or rather after Tisha B'Av, where the meal should be especially good. And she fears that her something about a bone, she sees a bone and she was worried that her chicken may not be kosher. So she runs to the rabbi to find out, for a shaila, to find out if it's kosher. And she's really panicked that if it isn't, she won't have time to get something else, to get another chicken for the meal. What we need to understand is that she and Mendel are childless, and it's going on 10 years, after which time the husband can and is obliged to divorce his wife if she doesn't provide him with a child. The halacha is a lot more complicated than that. We won't go into it, but the main thing is they both believe this, and the society in which they live believes that. She's been worried about this problem for some time now and has gone to see rabbis, rebbes, and healers. The rebbes have told her that Oinig Shabbos, the enjoyment of the Shabbos, is the main thing. Make the Shabbos as good, as delicious as it can be, and somehow this will help. There's clearly a sexual innuendo, right? If you please your husband in his belly, then you're going to go on to perform the next mitzvah of the Shabbos. But this is never explicitly stated. Rivka's worry about whether or not her chicken is treif is way beyond normal. It's clear that she feels her marriage hangs on this, depends on this. A pronouncement of a treif chicken on some level for her is a sentence on her marriage. So she rushes off to the rebbes in a frenzy, telling her husband to watch the tzimis, which later we find out burns, but that's another story. She bursts into the fish, excuse me, to watch the fish, right. So she rushes off to the rebbes in a frenzy, and she bursts into his office and finds he's not there, and she inadvertently grabs the shamus, the Rebbe's helper, the beadle, by the shoulder, who tells her, "Chap nish ken schorim bei der Plätze." Don't go grabbing men by the shoulder, Yidina or Isha, he calls her women. The rabbi's at the bathhouse, and he'll come when he'll come. Rivka can't believe that a rabbi could be so irresponsible as not to be home on a Friday afternoon with so many urgent matters coming up that have to be settled before Shabbos. And as she's sitting there, and this is the point where we're coming in, she sees another couple and a mother-in-law also waiting for the rabbi. As we'll see, she becomes fascinated with their case, with the young woman's case, because she sees many parallels to her own. Okay. Beruhigt. We're starting with that arrow, having calmed down. Yes.
Having calmed down, she just then noticed that in addition to the beadle, there was someone else present in the room. Not far from her stood a man with a hostile gaze, puffing angrily on a short tobacco pipe. Opposite him sat two women, one an older woman holding a small bottle of water in her hand and shaking her head every second so that the green ribbon of her bonnet kept quivering. The other was a young woman with tear-filled eyes. Rivka sprung towards him. Also with a religious question? No, answered the older woman with a sigh. Alas, not with a religious question. What else then? A divorce. A divorce? Friday, are you serious? Is he crazy? God help us. What can one do with a stubborn brute? He's dragging her here. Rivka understood that the old woman was speaking of the angry man who puffed his pipe with such fury. And just like that, all of a sudden, the young one replied not a word. She only lowered her head more steeply. Silently, tear after tear trickled from her eyes.
Beruhig bemerkt sie erst, als äußeren Schammes ist noch mit Stub. Nicht weit von ihr steht a Mannsparschein mit a Besenblick und pipket mit Kass von a Kurzlulkele. Und gegenüber sitzen zwei Weiber, eine an Alter, halt a Fläschele Wasser in der Hand, schockelt alle Rege mit dem Kopf. Als das grüne Stängele von Tippek halt ihn ein Zittern und die zweite, ein jung Weibel mit verwehten Augen. Rivke ist zu sie zugesprungen. Euch mit der Scheile? Nein, empfiehlt die Ältere mit der Sifts. Nebach, nicht mit der Scheile. Was denn? a get. A get? Freitag, was rät ihr, mischuge meine Sonim? Was tut man mit a Gazlan, als schleppt sie? Rivke versteht, als mir rät von Besenmanns Perschein, was pipket mit a Saakatz. Und glatt, plötzlich, die Junge empfängt nicht das Wort. Sie hat nur tiefer eingebeugendem Kopf und von die Augen kappet ihr still a Trär noch a Trär.
The old woman responded to the question eagerly. It's not so all of a sudden. They have no children, and it's already the 11th year of the marriage. It costs a lot of money. Hasidic rabbis and, excuse the comparison, healers and bone setters, and I don't know what else, and it doesn't help. And should any little thing happen in the home, this porter boy grabs her by the shoulder and drags her to the rabbi. If she doesn't walk fast enough, he gives her one in her side. Today he smelled smoke. The meat for the tzimis was scorched. Well. Rivka became frozen stiff with fear. Her husband was not a porter boy. He wouldn't grab her by the shoulder, but the 10th year was approaching and she had no children. She too had been to bone setters, healers, and Hasidic rabbis.
Es ist nicht so plötzlich. Sie haben kein Kinder nicht, schon das 11. Jahr. Es hat abgekostet Geld, Rabbeim und lahavdel Räufim und Totters und ich weiß was. Und es hilft nicht. Und kaum macht sich etwas in Stub, habt sie der Trägerjung bei dem Achsel und schleppt sie zum Rav. Geht sie nicht so geschwind, der langt in der Seite. Heint hat Räuch der Filt, das Zimmersfleisch hat sich angebrennt. Nu. Rivke ist verstarrt geworden, verschreckt. Ihr Mann ist nicht kein Trägerjung. Wird sie nicht schaffen bei die Plätze. Nur das 10. Jahr geht schon und kein Kinder hat sie nicht. Sie ist euch gewesen bei Totters, Räufim und Rabbeim.
And what did the rabbi say? Asked Rivka in a voice permeated with tears. What do the holy rabbis say? Alas, God will help, they say. A neck full of amulets. She could already have had a pearl necklace for the money spent. The Lechivitcher rabbi Boaz had wept with her. May I see gold, as I have seen with my own eyes how a tear dropped from his holy eyes to his holy cheek. He too said that God will help, but above all, he instructed her that she take extra care in the mitzvah of Oinik Shabbos. She should see to it that her husband has a good, merry Shabbos, that the house is clean, that she dresses in her Shabbos clothes, and that she is cheerful. And most important of all is the children. Well, it just so happened that the meat for the tzimis got burnt.
Und was haben die Rabbeim gesagt? Fragt Rivke mit der Kohl, angesagt mit Tränen. Was sagen nebach gute Jiden? Gott wird helfen, sagen sie. A Hals Kamees trockt sie. Sie wollt schon Perl gehabt, der Pfarr. Der Latutschener hat nebach mit ihr mitgewähnt. Ich soll also sehen Gold, wie ich hab allein gesehen, wie Trär ist im Arab von die heilige Augen auf der heilige Back. Hat euch gesagt, dass Gott wird helfen. Nur der Iker hat geheißen, soll sie geworden sein in Oinik Shabbos. Sie soll sehen, der Mann soll haben einen guten, freilichen Shabbos. Die Stube soll sein rein, sie soll sein angetan Shabbosdig und lustig soll sie sein. Und gar der Iker ist das schonend. Nu macht sich Punkt angebrennt Zimmersfleisch.
Rivka became even more caught up in the story. It was so similar to her own life. She too had been to the ends of the earth and had everywhere heard the same thing. God will help, just be a kosher little wife, observe your mitzvahs, and above all, prepare a kosher, merry Sabbath. Her situation was not as bleak. Her husband was not so crude as the porter there. And up until now, the Sabbaths have been successful for her. Yet who knows what will come later? She still had a few years to the 10-year mark. God still had time to take pity on her. Yet with this young wife, he had not shown compassion. She too had given gifts to the Hasidic rabbis, had dropped money into all the charity boxes and wept her eyes out. To wait longer than the 10 years, this her Mendel would not do for an instant. It's not permitted.
Rivke vertracht sich noch stärker. Es ist so ähnlich zu ihr eigenem Leben. Sie ist euch ausgewählt, wo die Welt hat ein Eck und hat euch dasselbe gehört. Gott wird helfen, nur sei a koscher Weibel, hielt deine Mitzvahs und der Iker mach a koscheren, freilichen Schabbes. Ihr Masel ist nicht so finster, ihr Mann ist nicht so meguschen wie der Träger da. Und die Schabbosim sind ihr bisher geraten. Nur wer weiß, was später wird sein. Sie hat noch ein paar Jahre zu die 10. Gott hat noch Zeit, sich merachem sein. Nur Ort hat auf dem Weibel sich nicht merachem gewesen. Sie hat euch Pedioines gegeben, in alle Puschkes reingeworfen und sich die Augen ausgewähnt. Und warten noch die 10 Jahre, wird ihr Mendel nicht errege, mit Tor nicht. Okay, that's as much of that as we're going to read. We won't tell you what happens. You'll have to get the book for it. It's kind of an unexpected ending. So let's talk a little bit about language. I'm a pretty seasoned reader of Yiddish literature, and I can say that at times I found the language very difficult. I think mainly because the world that she describes, even with all the books I've read, is still somewhat unfamiliar. You might have other ideas about this. Justin Cami, in his introduction, writes, Ruth Murphy's translations get to the essence of Perl's artistry by recognizing that literary translation is also an act of cultural interpretation. She invites the reader into Yiddish life on its own terms, refusing to translate certain terms and preserving Yiddish speech patterns that remind us that we are guests in another world. Murphy's choices never fetishize Yiddish speakers as exotic, but rather expand the imaginative possibilities of English. So that is quite high praise, Ruth, I would say. So what are one or two of the main difficulties you encountered, and what do you think Justin Cami means when he gives you this compliment?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Kim. And I actually wrote him and asked him and said, what did you mean by that? I always thought that was a nice way of saying my English sounds like the Yiddish. And he was like, well, yeah, that's what I meant. But I always like the way the Yiddish sounds. And I try and capture as much of that in the English as I can without it being totally unintelligible. And then I think the other thing he was referring to was not translating words like bris and cheder and like that, because there's more in other stories like Zipke. And I chose not to do that because there's just no way to do it right. Either you dumb it down or you as a translator, either you dumb it down or you have to explain it in 4 sentences, and none of it works. None of it sounds like the Yiddish. None of it gives the same feel, nuance. So I just left it, and I figured that people would probably, if they wanted to, they could go look it up, and then they could really see what it means instead of my attempting to come up with something. And the challenges that I had with language was a lot of it is very colloquial, and especially for a non-native speaker, incomprehensible to me. I just didn't understand it, which is where my teacher helped me a lot. And then some of the vocabulary was very obscure. We made some guesses there.
Okay, good. So let's go to our last one, which is, I can't say it's haha funny, but it's at least we wanted to leave you on a not so down a note. So we're going to read from this story called Das Theater, where I think she offers a rather hilarious, in some ways, portrait of how the Orthodox world viewed Yiddish theater, and I think also some of the melodrama that clearly did take place on stage. So Ruth, would you kind of bring our readers up to the point?
So we have a young couple, David and Malka, who live apparently not with her parents, but very close. They are very, very traditional, and her parents are very traditional. David and Malka are a very young couple. And David does not want the traditional life that he's kind of married into and that's being forced on him. And he apparently did this a year ago, and he's doing it again where he starts coming home late at night because he's going to the Yiddish theater. And Rivka, Malka, has been told by her parents that this is the Makamatuma, if I say it right. The absolute den of iniquity, where there's all sorts of sinful, terrible things happening, and she doesn't want to lose her husband. So once again, it's that night, he hasn't come home, and she decides that she herself will go to the theater, throw herself, at him and save him from this life of sin. And if he doesn't want to come with her, well, then she's going to go to hell with him. And that's kind of where we pick up.
Okay.
She's making that decision. So she's in her bedroom still. Okay, so my turn to read. So it seems to her that her David is standing bent over a deep well and will fall in at any moment. A cold sweat of fear covers her, and she jumps up. He must be saved, rescued, and she herself. She doesn't want her mother to berate him, her father, God forbid, to beat him. No, she won't be able to bear it. She herself will do it all. She already knows what to do. She will go to him in the theater and tear him out of those godless hands. God will help her, and she will not be harmed, and he will heed her words. At times he loves her so much, and she will weep before him, weep with bitter tears. Sometimes things happen when a wife must rescue her husband from hell. Her mother had once told her about an aunt of hers who had dragged her husband home from some very disgusting companion. Her mother didn't want to say who and where and what, only that her aunt had prepared to sacrifice herself. They'd wanted to thrash her. And she too will sacrifice herself for her David. Only she won't go like her aunt did, on with a broom, and she won't drag him home as her aunt did, by the ears. Instead, she means to plead with him, to weep, to wrap her arms around his legs and kiss them. She will prevail. He loves her so much sometimes. And if not, she wants to perish along with him.
Es dacht sich ihr, als ihr David steht übergebeugen über einen tiefen Brunnen und wird nur Wasser reinfallen. Ein kalter Schweiß bedeckt sie vor Schreck. Sie springt auf. Rate, wen muss man ihm, rate, wen? Und sie allein? Sie will nicht, die Mutter soll ihm siedeln. Der Vater soll ihm Chas v'Sholom schlagen. Nein, sie wird es nicht aushalten. Doch sie allein wird alles tun. Sie weiß schon, was zu tun. Sie wird zu ihm gehen in Theater rein und wird ihm rausreißen von die goyische Hand. Gott wird ihr helfen und sie wird nicht nissig werden und wird sie folgen. Hat sie teilmal so lieb. So lieb. Und sie wird weinen vor ihm, mit bitteren Tränen weinen. Es treffen sich so eine Sachen. Als ein Weib rate west aus dem Mann von Gernem. Die Mutter hat ihr einmal erzählt, wie ihr Salomea hat heimgeschleppt den Mann von Goramieser Chevre. Sie hat ihr nicht gewollt sagen, wer und wen und was. Nur Messias Nefesh hat die Mumme gehabt. Man hat sie gewollt schlagen. Und sie wird sich euch vor ihr Davidlen Meister Nefesh sein. Nur sie wird nicht gehen wie jene mit der Besem. Sie wird ihm nicht heimschleppen wie jene bei die Euren. Sie wird nur sich betten bei ihm, betten, weinen, die Füße herumnehmen und kuschen. Sie wird peulen. Hat sie teilmal so lieb. Ella nicht will sie verfallen werden zusammen mit ihm.
Now she's actually in the theater. Now she's actually in the theater. Sheva.
Okay.
She's in the theater. She's paid her money and she's found her way to her seat. The show is ongoing and she's never been to anything like this before. So it says in the theater.
Baruch, scroll down, Baruch. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so there. So she's so flustered that she can't even buy the ticket. She just puts her purse on the counter before the clerk, and he takes out the money. He counts out her change, then he hands her back and tells her where to go. So in the theater, she turns her face away from the stage. She feels like here must be actual sorcery, true idolatry. If it weren't so cramped, so impossible to extricate her arms, she would cover her ears. At any rate, she'll close her eyes just until it becomes quieter. Surely here in the theater, there must also be, excuse the comparison, a pause in the service, like when the Torah is taken out, an intermission, and then she'll search for him. She'd know him a mile away. She closes her eyes, but the music intrudes upon her ears. They are singing and they are playing so sadly, so weepingly, coming so much from the heart that it matches her situation precisely, her heartache.
Sie ist im Theater und dreht sich weg mit dem Pony von der Szene. Sie fühlt, als dorten muss sein der rechte Kischef, die Emisse avoide Sorge. Es soll nicht sein so eng, also unmöglich die Hand herauszubekommen, wo sie sich die Euren verstellt. Alkohol Ponym wird sie die Augen zumachen, bis es wird nur stiller werden. Da muss doch euch sein Lahavdel an Ausnehmens, an Überhackerts. Und dämmelt wird sie ihn schon absuchen. Ein Mile weit wird sie ihn erkennen. Sie vermacht die Augen, noch in die Euren reißt sich herein die Musik. Und mir singt und mir spielt, so treurig, so weinendig, so von Herz heraus, als es passt, Punkt für ihr Masel, für ihr Herzweitig.
And the scene on the stage, which had at first scared her so, now begins to attract her like a magnet. In vain does her yetitoy, her good inclination, try to keep her eyelids closed. They open on their own and grab onto every beam of light, her ears to every sound, and it all goes straight to her heart. And her heart is so tender, so incredibly tender, so saturated with tears. Perhaps this is not a hell at all. This flashes through her mind, yet the thought goes no further. The scene forces its way into her heart and mind. Here she can even forget her David. When the kettle drum calls or the braided trumpet sounds, her legs tremble beneath her. Then when the fiddle sings or the clarinet wails, well, then she feels so good.
Keep going.
Okay. God be praised, she thinks. In today's performance, there are no sorcerers, no idolaters, no showgirls even. There on the stage are only fine ladies in silk and velvet dresses, and noblemen standing in yellow boots with curved swords, dressed in gold and silver clothing. And one of them, the most handsome of them all, stands in the middle and presses his right hand to his heart, a heart that must be aching, and he sings tearfully, and all answer him in consolation. Yet he does not allow himself to be comforted and laments even more and more.
Und die Szene, was hat sie so geschrocken, hebt sie erzieht an zu ziehen wie ein Magnet. Siehst, will Yetzer Tov einhalten die Bremen. Sie öffnen sich allein und chappen jeder Strahl Licht, wie das Euer, jeder Ton. Und alles kommt ihr in Herz rein. Und das Herz ist so weich, so wunderlich weich, so angesagt mit Herren. Sie ist öfter gar kein Genem nicht. Blitzt er auf in Meuch, nur der Gedanke wickelt sich nicht weiter. Die Szene reißt sich hier mit Gewalt in Herz und in Meuch herein. Sie kann da auch viele ihr Daviden vergessen. Und es ruft sich an die Kesselpoik oder die geflochtene Trompete, zittern unter ihr die Fies, nur als die Fiedel singt oder ein Kleinett weint, dämmelt fühlt sie sich so gut. Geläubt ist Gott, tracht sie, was heint ist bei Emes on Kischefmachers und on Avoide Sores, on Schicksals a viele. Es stehen nur Pannes in Sametene und seidene Kleider und Pritzim stehen in gelle Stiefel, krumme Schwerden und goldene und silberne Kleider. Und einem, der schönste von sie, steht in der Mitte und hält sich zu mit der rechten Hand das Herz. Es muss ihm das Herz wehtun. Und singt mit Jammer und alle empfern ihm mit Trost, nur lässt sich nicht trösten und jammert als mehr und mehr.
Suddenly, pushing his way through the noblemen and fine ladies, there comes an old man. His hair is as gray as a dove, yet he has a voice like a lion and a pistol in his hand. He speaks with rage to the young man, the one who is weeping. He asks him something one time, a second time, and then grasping the pistol, shoots him dead on the spot. Only then did the inferno begin. The curtain fell and people began to clap their hands, to stomp their feet, to shout and make crazy sounds. They must certainly want the old murderer to be handed over to them. They will tear him to pieces. everything turns dark before her eyes. She feels that she can bear it no longer and runs out of the theater.
Plötzlich hat sich durch die Pritzi mit die Panis durchgerissen ein alter Mann. Ist grau wie a Täub, nur a Kohl hat wie a Leib und a Pistolett in der Hand. Mit Kass hat gerät zum jungen Mann, was hat gejammert. Hat ihm etwas gefragt, einmal und zweimal. Und danach hat gehabt dem Pistolett und hat ihn erschossen auf den Ort. Und a Zinn hat sich erst angehäuben, das gerne. Die Vorhang ist auch abgefallen und Menschen haben angehäuben zu patschen mit die Hand, zu tuppen mit die Fies und zu schreien und zu machen mit schugene Keules. Sie wollen gewiss, man soll sie herausgeben dem alten Rozeach. Sie wollen ihm auf Sticker zerreißen. Es wird ihr finster vor die Augen. Sie fühlt, als sie wird es nicht aushalten und läuft heraus von Theater. Okay, so that is as much as we're going to read of that. She doesn't find him there. And again, it ends in a kind of unexpected way. So before we open it up for Q&A, and Baruch, what do you think would be the best way? Just for people to raise their virtual hands and then we'll call on them?
Yeah, I see a couple hands already.
Okay, great. So before we get into that, I just, because I know some of you have to go, I just want to let everybody know that this Tuesday, there will be another Salomea Perl event that is hosted by YIVO. And that will be at 1 o'clock. And it will feature, of course, Ruth and Anna Goncher, who's here, a Yiddish teacher and literary scholar, Justin Kami, who wrote the introduction, and Rachel Kafrisen, who's a journalist and interested in all things Yiddish. So you can, I'm sure, Google YIVO Salomea Perl, the date, and you should sign up for that. You know, you need to get a virtual ticket to come in. So good. Questions? Baruch?
I think I first saw Jane's hand.
Okay. Jane?
They have to unmute.
And then Anna Guncher.
Yeah, let's go to Anna for now.
Okay, Anna, Hannah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for this wonderful program. Ruth, I have no words for you. We'll do that another time. This particular story in theater, what struck me was how young, and at some point she talks about the fact that her husband is just beginning to grow facial hair. And her response to the being in the theater again reveals the fact that Salome understood what happens in the theater and opera, and here's this young girl discovering for the first time. I think you create in your translation, you create such a wonderful experience for the reader of discovery and excitement and fear and all these different emotions that she's experiencing. You do it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Salomea's art.
Well,
I'm just the conduit. Thank you.
Well,
and that's her art.
Being a conduit is a hard job.
Absolutely.
Very hard job. Good. Baruch, any other hands?
Yeah.
Jane Gaben from
Yeah.
Jane is now.
Sorry. Yeah. Ich habe eine Frage. This is fascinating material, but I was just a little puzzled by the translation of one word, shiksas in the theater. Shiksas I normally think of as a non-Jewish women. Why did you choose to translate it to showgirls?
Because of the nuance that I wanted. That was the nuance that I wanted, and I actually got a really good suggestion from Shalom Beinfeld that maybe it should be peasant boys and peasant girls, and I think that may actually be better. But I didn't I didn't want the stress to be on the fact that they weren't Jewish,
Right.
because what's that going to mean? What does that tell you? Like, I wanted, as like people on the stage and things that nice Jewish girls don't do, that's my interpretation of it. So it's the nuance that I wanted, like that. But I mean, you're correct, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in this case, I don't think peasants, I mean, they're no longer peasants. They're on the stage, they're actors. So I think often that works, but I wouldn't say here. I mean, I'm still left, I'm assuming this is not even the Yiddish theater. Unless she, or do you think it is, Anna? And she just, anybody who's there has to be somehow a
No, I don't believe it's the Yiddish theater. I don't believe it's the Yiddish theater, and to me it seems to be quite operatic. Actually, she might have stumbled into
Sholem.
the opera.
Yeah.
Sholem, you need to unmute yourself.
Or at least the the light opera, whatever. Yes, for sure.
And I think Shix's is very well translated here, because it's these non-Jewish, it's very clear it's the other, and the showgirl, it doesn't have to be a peasant, it's the other. And the showgirl, low class.
Yeah, it's what nice Jewish girls didn't do. And Sholem wanted to say something, I think.
Although they will be doing it soon. Okay, Sholem.
We finally got you unmuted.
It was I who suggested peasants rather than showgirls, because the showgirl, it doesn't sound right for that time.
I thought it was a good suggestion.
But aside from that, it's not the narrator who's calling them Shixes and Shkotzim. It's her father, for whom these are all just peasants. Incidentally, it is to me also not clear whether this is a Yiddish theater or a Polish theater. It raises another question. What kind of town is this? I just have a few things to say, and I'll get them over with. I did not find the language difficult. It is very much of its time and very idiomatic. And I think even that Deutschmilisch Maiden, I think was inserted as a kind of jab at pretentious language, rather than something that Salomea Perl herself would ever use. The language is of its time. The place is a little harder to pin down. The places vary. The town that has a theater must be a town of some, whether it's a Yiddish theater or a Polish theater, doesn't matter in this case. It has to be a town of a certain size and of a certain...
And they have various synagogues too, we know that.
Whereas another place is like a Hamantash, 3 corners, a shul and a mikveh and a hektish. And also in one town, the tailor, Mendel, who is not a Latnik, but a Schneider, is denounced as a Litvak. I was wondering, Lomja is close to the cultural border between Polish and Litvak Jewry, and the boundary was moving, Litvaks were moving closer to Warsaw and bringing with them a kind of more rational and more critical view of the Jewish tradition. And this was a threat to the kind of traditional Polish world that Salomea Perl is mostly writing about. So the place, I had trouble placing. Of course, one is the epistolary story is set partly in Warsaw. That's very clear. But otherwise, what we're getting is different places in Jewish Poland, and not all of one cut.
Right.
All right, that's enough.
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't tell us. I mean, it may well have been Lublin, which is where she really spent probably more of her conscious years than in Lomja. She came as a young schoolgirl, I think. But it doesn't really matter. It's, as you say, it's a sizable town or city. It has a theater and so forth. If she wanted us to know where it was, she'd probably tell us. Martha, unmute, yeah.
Another word that popped out to me was goyeshe, which was translated as godless. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was I didn't want the focus to be on who was Jewish and who wasn't. I mean, I felt like that was, I mean, are they not the same? You know, at that time, they were probably the same thing. So, I mean, I imagine people are going to look at my translation and go, why did she do that for a lot of things? But, I mean, it is, you know, it could go a lot of ways. It could go a lot of ways.
Right.
I wanted to say too, I know if you look at the original text, Salomea Perl wrote like a litbach. My teacher was always commenting on that.
Yeah, she's got like a lot of hots, like hot gewachsen, hot gegangen. So very possibly Lamja is on the border there and was influenced by that, I'm thinking, but I don't really know enough to be sure. Any other questions?
I see Karen.
Yeah, well, I had that same problem with Goyish and Godless. And we obviously know a little bit of Yiddish, not very much, but I would know what Goyish means. I know it wouldn't mean godless. If I didn't know that and I was reading the English translation, I would get a misinterpretation.
Perhaps, but I think that translating the word goyim and shiksas and shkotzim is a very problematic issue to the translator, and it depending on the text, depending on the context, it could be done in different ways. So yeah, I mean, we don't all have to agree, but I think it works, what Ruth did. I mean, you get the idea that she's entered this den of iniquity that is a place of idol worship and ungodliness. And
Black Jewish.
Yeah. Good. Any other hands? Shalom.
Martin.
Oh, Martin.
No, there is another one.
Okay.
Martin.
Yes.
Yeah.
The advice that the woman who is childless gets from the rabbis seems so pedestrian and ordinary. Do you have a hint that this was meant in any way to be sarcastic? That's one thing. And a small point, almost every story and every song is a line about the dark eyes, the large dark eyes. So in a population where almost everybody had dark eyes, was this a convention? It seems like, a useless defining point, but it's in so many stories. Any thoughts?
I know that going to the rabbis was absolutely genuine. It shows up in several stories, and it introduces the reader to the Balashemos, the rabbi miracle workers, particularly with the case of infertility. Where did one go? You went to miracle workers and healers. What else did you have? And
So
what did they have to offer but charms and this and that?
What do you do? What do you do?
So I think that was genuine. And I don't know, to me, my interpretation of why she has dark eyes is, I mean, they're beautiful and they're soulful and they're emotional and they're deep, and that's how she writes.
Yeah,
I mean,
if I can just say that I agree with Ruth. I mean, there is nothing ironic about what the rabbi said. I mean, this is the advice that they had. They're not doctors. Very little was known about these problems, and that's what they said. Now,
and it was always the woman's fault.
It was almost always the woman's fault. Now, when we see this couple, I mean, it gets even worse. The man is in there. He's accusing his wife. She was drowning and she let a man touch her in order to save her. And this somehow is, she's now a sinful woman. I mean, it's horrible, really. But Hannah says not to give more away. But yeah, they didn't have really other answers except maybe get yourself an amulet or try this tzaddik. So yeah,
which is not unique to Judaism either.
No, good. Any others? Baruch, anybody else? I know Sholem had wanted. Was there anybody else who hadn't asked once yet.
Oh, I see. Renan Leitner.
Okay, and then Shalom.
Now, it appears from what you've displayed that we're going to have a volume that has interleaved English and Yiddish text, so they can be read, and I appreciate that very much. Has thought been given to a glossary? Since so much research apparently went into some specific terms, some things idiomatic, it would be helpful. And I just wonder if it hasn't been included in the volume, in today's world, could the publisher, if someone prepared a glossary, put it online? It would encourage us to look at the publisher's page.
You're not the first person to suggest that, so it's a good idea. I had thought about a glossary, and I don't remember why I decided not to, but that's certainly a thought. That's certainly a thought. My only concern with a glossary is, am I really qualified to write what these things mean? But I mean, it's a good thought, and I think it's something we'll probably discuss. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question, if there is. Yes,
Sure.
Shalom.
Not forget.
I know the name Tzipke comes up twice.
Yeah.
Of course, in the first story, and also in Potka's wife's name is also Tzipke, but it's spelled differently. Tzipke and Tzipki. And also Potki, ki as a diminutive ending in Yiddish is not familiar to me. Though I know that the yud was sometimes used instead of an ayin in older spelling. I just wanted to ask you how you went about sort of dealing with the varieties of spelling that were so common before Yiddish spelling was standardized, in the 1890s and early 20th century.
That was kind of an ongoing discussion between my teacher and I, because I really wanted to preserve as much of the old spellings as possible because I like them, but and to show kind of the reader the original text. But at the same time, they're so hard. They're confusing. And the book in a lot of ways is meant to be used in the classroom, and you can't have too much of that. I noticed in Potki, I think every last name ends with a yud. Potki, Retsky, Sipki. So I mean, there was a lot of variations, and we standardized it mostly and tried to get the spelling right mostly, but I still tried to leave a little bit of the original spelling, even though the reality is that the spelling really, who knows what Salomea Perl wrote and what her editors changed it to. So it was challenging. I mean, dealing with overtext is always challenging. And we had one page of, I think, Putki, where I had gotten whoever it was that archived it, put their stamp right on the word. And it's like, now I can't read it. And I had to like contact all these people to try and get a page that wasn't stamped, which I finally got from the New York Public Library. But it was challenging. It was fun though, it was fun. I love the old spelling. So.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
what Potki is, what kind of name Potki is?
No, do you know that name? I've never heard it. I don't know.
My teacher didn't know it, no. And it's maybe from Pesach or
no idea.
Yeah.
No. Good. Okay. So if there are no more questions, you folks have been very
Sheva.
Yes. Yeah.
Not a question, but really thank you so much, Ruth and Sheva, for this beautiful, inspiring, and so deep presentation. And it was great to see so many familiar faces who I didn't see for so long time. And I hope to see you soon. Ponem al ponem, in person. We are all trying to do this. And during this presentation, I was so taken by it, so I already ordered the book, and Boruch sent everybody the link if you want to.
Thank you.
It's in chat, and some people already are holding the book. Shoshka Rezel is one of them.
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
And also, thank you so much for coming to this unique presentation. Many of you are students of our classes. We'll be studying our summer semester in late June, early July, and the registration will begin late May, early June. And also we invite you, so this is big news, so we will be having our trip to Yiddishland in camp, and people who are interested to spend a week immersion in Yiddish language, culture, and friends, heartily invited. Seid mir alle gesund, and this is recorded, and the recording will be available to all participants and everybody who is interested in this topic online.
Kolya, if I can just say one thing.
Of course,
Kolya? Okay, two things. Yeah, so if you're not good at getting links like I am from a chat, you can just Google the name, go to Amazon or BenYehuda Press, go to BenYehuda Press first to get the book. And I just would like to say that I just found this such an amazing discovery. That, you know, normally we always say that Yiddish women writers were primarily poets. There were some prose writers, maybe Isabella was the wife of Mordechai Spector. She was the same time and a little earlier, but then most of the prose writers come later. So one more discovery like this, I think, and we really have to start rethinking a lot of what we thought about Yiddish women writers. So that's part of why I just thought this was so amazing. And all credit to Ruth for sticking at it or to it or with it, whatever it is, and finding these really amazing stories. So thank you all for coming. Seid gesund, and thank you to the workers circles of New York and Boston. Okay. Seid gesund.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Schönen Dank.
Okay.
Seid gesund.